Good evening, everybody. It's so good to have you all here with us. Tonight, we're going to be talking about teaching slavery using place-based learning, and we're so excited to have you all. We are recording the webinar, and it will be available for views after tonight as well on the Historic Hudson Valley site in a couple of weeks, we hope. And so feel free to share this recording with lots of people. So we'll get started with a few introductions. My name is Jera Boteo, and I work with an organization called the Hard History Project. And we have been partnering with Historic Hudson Valley for the last couple of years as they do amazing work that you'll hear Julia and Nicole talk about, and really telling like the true story of the way that our country was founded. What we now call the United States has a very rich history before we became the United States, and they've done a really incredible job teaching that history. So my name is Jera, and we'll be on Zoom together tonight. Feel free to camera on and unmute and ask questions if you have them. One thing that we do ask is that you just keep yourself muted during other people's presentations so that our presenters can just be focused on their presentations. And yeah, we'll be sharing some resources as we go throughout the night as well. So we'll just start with some quick introductions from our presenters, and then Julia and Nicole will talk some about Historic Hudson Valley. So I'll pass it over to Cynthia.
Hello, yeah, I'm Cynthia, and I've loved getting to support Jera and everyone else in this project. I've been in education for more than 20 years, mostly as an English teacher. So just excited to be here tonight.
And Cynthia will be hanging out in the chat, so she'll be responding to questions and taking your questions there as well. All right, let's pass it over to Nicole.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Nicole Wallace. I'm the Director of Education at Historic Hudson Valley. So I oversee both our public programs and our school programs at our 5 historic sites that we have here, which you'll get to hear about in a second when Julia talks you through our short presentation.
Love it. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
I'm Julia Butterfield. I am the K-12 program coordinator at Historic Hudson Valley. So I work on developing and implementing all of the programs and resources that we offer for K-12 students and teachers.
Oh, go ahead, Alice. Sorry, I was muted. I said, Alice, I'll pass it over to you, and I was muted.
That's okay. Hi, my name is Alice DePina. I am a social studies teacher here in Oahu, Hawaii, and I teach 7th grade Hawaiian Kingdom and 8th grade U.S. history beginning to Reconstruction. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Max?
Thanks. My name is Max Comando. I am a social studies teacher in New Haven, Connecticut. I teach modern world history, AP Gov, and I partner with, I do homebound tutoring, which I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight, and kind of collaborate with our African American and Latinx studies teacher.
Thank you. All right, and then we'll have Molly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Molly, and I am a history professor at the University of New Orleans. And I'm also a historian on the digital project Freedom on the Move. And that's how I met Jera and the Hard History Project. They've worked with us to develop educational resources. So I'm going to be talking about a project we did with them here in New Orleans.
Thank you all so much. All right, well, I'll pass it over to Julia, and she's going to talk some about the Historic Hudson Valley project.
Yes, absolutely. So, to my slide. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of those programs for students and teachers at Phillipsburg, and a little bit about how we started working with some of the teachers you're going to hear from tonight. So Historic Hudson Valley is a network of 5 historic sites in Westchester County, so just north of New York City. But the one we're really going to be focusing on today is Phillipsburg Manor, which is a site that talks about the history of slavery in the colonial New York. We also have Van Cortlandt Manor, which talks about the period, the New Nation period right after the American Revolution. Sunnyside, which was the home of Washington Irving. We have the Union Church of Picantico Hills, which has stained glass windows by Matisse and Chagall. And then we also manage the tour program at Kykuit, which is the Rockefeller estate. But we're really going to focus today on Phillipsburg Manor. So this was the home of a wealthy Dutch family called the Phillipses. In the late 16 and early 1700s, it was a 52,000 acre property that was mostly rented out to tenant farmers who were growing wheat. At the center of the property was the water-powered gristmill that you can see here. And all of the farmers were bringing their wheat to that gristmill where it was ground into flour and then shipped to New York City, mostly to be sold to sugar plantations in the Caribbean. And we know that all of the people who were living at this part of the site that you see here and were forced to work there were a group of enslaved people. So we have an inventory that was taken of the property in 1750 that tells us the names of the people who were here and the ages of the children. And beginning in the late 90s, we began the process of, reinterpreting the history that we tell at the site to really focus on these individuals. Through this, we received multiple NEH grants that allowed us to conduct extensive research into the Phillips family personal and business records, but also just more about slavery in New York at the time. We formed an African American advisory board, which still exists. And this has changed over the years. Certainly, we've learned more information. The language we use to talk about this has changed. We've developed programs for multiple audiences. So we have really expanded the school program offerings we have that talk about this history, more resources for teachers to, bring this history to their classrooms and to their students. And then we developed the digital history website, People Not Property, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. So we have over the years, we've really developed a framework for engaging visitors with this history, and particularly students, and I'm going to walk through that a little bit now. So again, we are one historic site. We're talking about one community of 23 people, which is something, called microhistory. So looking at a historical period through the experience of an individual or a small group of individuals. And, this is very important. We're asking students to understand something incredibly complicated. It's the transatlantic slave trade. It's, connection to the entirety of the development of the New York economy and society and its legacy. And that's a lot. But we're starting very small with this particular community. What were their experiences? What did they do in response? We want to always allow time for all visitors, but again, particularly students, to process any, emotional responses they might have with the material. And we always invite them to share any emotional responses they have, certainly seeing the names when they first come to the site. And, being very honest with them that this is something that, we as educators have a particular emotional response to. And the work that we do is really grounded in the primary documents we have about the site and also our historic collections. And we always discuss the objects in our collection in the context of who used them. So we don't say, this is how the butter churn did this. The butter churn did this to turn cream into butter. We say, Dinah, one of the enslaved women, was using the object this way to churn the cream into butter. And we emphasize individuality and autonomy wherever possible. So the way that I learned about slavery when I was in school was, the enslaved people were sort of this nameless, undifferentiated mass of victims, and other people were always acting upon them. And of course, it was like Abraham Lincoln and William Lloyd Garrison and Jefferson Davis. But that erases the fact that the people we are talking about at Phillipsburg did find ways to make choices, to express their culture, to express loving relationships for one another, to form communities, and find other ways to resist. And we certainly should put them all first when we name abolitionists from history. And again, we're talking about the people here and who are at Phillipsburg, and we're not comparing their situation or their experiences to other repressive institutions. We really avoid comparisons such as like, well, it was, better or worse to be enslaved at Phillipsburg than to be somewhere else. That's really not relevant to what we're talking about. We're talking about these people and honoring their history. And we don't know everything. We're honest with students about this. And we're honest with students that, over time, we have learned more, that we're changing how we do this. And of course, there are things that we don't know, and there's a reason for that. So, we don't know, so much about these people was not written down, or they weren't given the opportunity to write their own experiences, right? And that affects what we know 250 years later. And this is something that students really understand. So we have started leading more workshops for teachers on how to teach this history in the classroom. And one of these was an NEH Teachers Institute. And that's how we started working with Alice and Max. So in 2019, we launched the website People Not Property, which again was a way of expanding the work that we're doing. It's an opportunity to reach people who maybe can't visit the site or can't easily visit the site. It's also a way to extend the learning experience for those who do visit the site. So I'm going to quickly show you a little bit about what this website looks like. And I have to switch what I'm sharing again. Hit the same mistake last. Okay. So as you can see, this involves multiple types of media. It explores the stories of individuals. We have videos, document explorers, sort of pages that people can read along. And then we have a few sort of choice activities. And it's divided into 4 chapters. And within those chapters, there are subsections. So again, the labor systems, again, talks about the development of the different labor systems in the colonies. And again, this is the example of something that students could, or anyone who's interested could scroll through and read, but contains images as well as larger texts. And then we also have document explorers. So we have a document explorer version of the inventory where students can click on certain words and learn more about them. So there's sort of a pop-up that explains more about them. But there is also a transcript feature to make the document more clear to read than this scan of an older document. And then there's also a glossary feature that would highlight words students might not know. But the videos are a very significant part of the website, and they feature interviews with some of the staff from HHV and also leading scholars in the field. So, and inspired by this, we've sort of continued to expand our digital offerings. And we are this spring launching an interactive graphic novel called Kofi's Fire, which explores the story of a man named Kofi who was enslaved by the Phillips family, who was accused in the 1741 conspiracy, in which there were a series of fires set in colonial New York City that were blamed on a conspiracy of enslaved people and indentured servants in the area. And this is, again, a graphic novel, but it's designed to be read on a computer. And similar to People Not Property, it has interactive features that might help scaffold the story for students and make connections between the fictional or the narrative of the graphic novel and what we know about the real history. And you can find more about these resources as well as our lesson plans. We also offer on-site field trips on our website. You can also email us if you have more questions about any of these or how to access them or what might be best for you or what more we could offer that would be better for you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. I appreciate it. These resources are amazing, and you're going to see Max and Alice and how they took a lot of these resources and incorporated them into their lessons. So I've had the privilege of working with Julia and Nicole and their team for the last few years, helping teachers develop resources around these, and it really brings the history to life in a really impactful way. So, and if you are from the New York area and have a chance to actually go to the site, I would encourage that as well. It's very powerful. And get a tour from Julia because she's really great. So, well, I'm going to pass it over to Molly. As Molly mentioned, we have had like some really amazing opportunities to work together in New Orleans to bring the history of slavery to life for children, grades 3 to 12. A couple of years ago, we did a big project. So Molly learned a lot. We both did, and all the teachers did too, learned a lot about really some amazing ways to bring local history to life. And I think being part of that project, as I started to walk through the streets of New Orleans, learning about the history of what happened in the city, it really impacted me. Anytime I go back there, I just can't see the same buildings, the same places the same way. And I know that happened for a lot of the students who participated in the project too. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Molly.
Thanks, Jara. Hi, everybody. So I've got my stopwatch running so that I don't go over time, and I may go under time. I'm just going to try to give you kind of I'm not an expert on place-based learning, but I'm a seasoned campaigner now. So I, along with Jara, was learning as we did this project, and so I think even just this exercise of bringing it to you all, you know, has like helped me to articulate things that if I were to do it again, I would do differently or do more of, that sort of thing. So I'm happy to answer any questions. So I just, as I mentioned earlier, I just want to give you a little foundation for where we often start with kids if we are asking them to work with Freedom on the Move, which, as Max said, is a database for self-liberating people, the fugitive slave advertisements. Because students bring certain expectations into the classroom if they think they're going to be talking about resistance or even quote unquote runaway slaves, right? So even the youngest students bring in some expectations about the Underground Railroad, for instance, right, which is often sort of the network that most broadly gets associated with people who self-liberate. And that includes certainly if they're older students, they may have read Frederick Douglass, or they may know of Harriet Jacobs or Ellen Craft and their sort of dramatic escapes from slavery that don't really necessarily resemble what you see in the advertisements for Freedom on the Move. So we went into this project having this discussion initially with the teachers, right, to sort of say, you know, this is what we expect most people might know about fugitives, and we want to offer a new perspective for students and teachers about what it might look, and how to teach that. Right, some of them might have read Uncle Tom's Cabin. Some of them might have watched Underground. So there's a lot of cultural, you know, signals out there about what it means to be a runaway slave. And so Harriet, right, it's another thing that students might have seen already, and had a sense of, you know, what it means, Harriet Tubman's story means, and how people self-liberated, through armed resistance and traveling long distance and things like that, right? So, so what we did with this project was we first wanted to, I'm gonna skip over this, to introduce students to the two kinds of advertisements. And as Jara said, we worked with students who are were as young as third grade and all the way through high school. And so it was up to the teachers themselves how they wanted to introduce the students to the database. Some teachers just curated some advertisements that had run in the New Orleans papers, and some teachers had the students explore the database on their own. There are two types of advertisements, just for your knowledge here. There are advertisements posted by enslavers, hoping to enlist other white people in the recapture of people who have run away. And then there are ads placed by jailers who have caught alleged fugitives and are posting ads about them so that they can be reunited with people who claim them as property. So those are the two kinds of ads that run throughout the Freedom on the Move database. So as I mentioned earlier to Jara, my previous iteration of my PowerPoint is not exactly this one, so I'm trying to recreate some intermediate slides. But to touch on what both Max talked about and People Not Property talks about is really we try to orient students in the space of the city. And New Orleans, sort of like New Haven, one of the appeals of doing this project there was that a lot of the built environment in New Orleans is the same as it was, right? You have a lot of historic buildings, especially in the French Quarter, and so it allows for teachers to take students with the help of field trips and funding and things like that to visit the French Quarter, which is what we did. So although we didn't get to the level of teaching students about specific trajectories, at least from the perspective of those of us running the project, we do know that some teachers did do this, right? That they could point to an advertisement and say, this is right around the corner from our school, for instance. Or what locations in this advertisement about a woman named Jane do you think we would be able to find on a map, right? So letting the students sort of orient themselves within the space of the city, and thinking about why Jane ran away and what was she wearing when she left, and why do you think she's in the market? So really letting the students be the interrogators of these advertisements was sort of the first really important thing that we had to learn to do. In other words, like while the teachers prepped the students with a sort of contextual information about the history of slavery in New Orleans, when it came down to working with the primary source materials, because these sources are spare but full of detail, right? They're very economical, but they're full of detail that students can understand about individual people, which is also reflected in People Not Property. Students are able to sort of develop a stake in the story of people who ran away. Let me advance here. So this is just to give you a sense of the, we have advertisements of Freedom on the Move for all of these areas of town, right? So students could kind of pinpoint particular advertisements. Excuse me, now it's going too fast. And then we also tried to get students to see the city differently this is what it looks like now, right? So if you read Fanny's advertisement, you get what? Some addresses, right? You can go find 18 Bienville Street, right? And 227 Rampart Street, and see that these spaces still exist today. So Fanny was an advertisement that spoke to a lot of the students, and they have a lot of interesting responses to Fanny's story. But of course, she fled with her daughter, which is not something that most students think about when they think about a runaway slave. And then she has another daughter living around the corner, right? So it sort of situates her within a family situation. And then, of course, you can go to the site where Fanny's daughter lived. Now it's a coffee shop. So really trying to get students to understand that connection between past and present. I'm having to jump around here. I don't have pictures of my field trips, which is really frustrating, but I'm going to show you a video clip and you'll get to see some of the kids on the field trips. But so after introducing them to the primary material, every class took 2 field trips. One was through the French Quarter with a tour guide named Shayna Griffin, who does who sort of tailored her tour to the age groups of the students, that she walked them through the French Quarter, starting with the transatlantic slave trade at the river and sort of walking them through the French Quarter. And even within, we had 5 schools, 6 teachers on this project. Even within that group, there were students who had never been to the French Quarter, who lived just across the river in on the West Bank. There were students who didn't know what a slave quarter was in the urban context. They didn't know how to recognize it. So there were all these things that they were discovering on these on the field trip through the French Quarter. The other field trip they took, as you'll see from the video, was to Whitney Plantation, which is about an hour's drive from New Orleans. And if you're familiar with Whitney, it is really the only plantation site, at least in our area, that endeavors to tell the history of plantation slavery from the perspective of enslaved people. And so in that sense, it's really the only place you would actually want to take particularly younger students who are just learning about the history of slavery, is to take them to a place like Whitney so that they come in with a perspective of looking at plantations from the perspective of people who were enslaved there. And then, so let me jump to the video. I'm sorry, I'm so scattered. But my PowerPoint got discombobulated on between home and work. And so I'm just going to play little snippets of this, and you can sort of get a sense for how all of this worked. And then I will talk about the third component. So there's the primary source material with Freedom on the Move. There were the field trips, which were all the classes took, both field trips, French Quarter and to Whitney Plantation. And then the final component is the creative response that students were asked to give to the material. And you'll see some of that here in the video. And I will jump around. I hope this works.
A lot of things that we're dealing with as a collective society can be tracked back to our issues with race, class, gender.
At the end of the day, we're trying to humanize this history.
Our students deserve to know who they are. They deserve to be seen and they deserve to be heard.
I hadn't learned it from an economic view.
Once again, a 9th grader asked me that question. I'm like, whew. The more we connect history to today, the more students become invested.
It's important for teachers to teach our students, our next generation, about the history of slavery, because slavery is the root of much of our issues of the modern day, if we're creating the next generation of American citizens, it's very important for us to know where we come from as a community so that we can continue to work towards a better tomorrow for all of us.
Freedom on the Move is a collaborative digital crowdsourced database that pulls together, digitizes, and transcribes ads for freedom-seeking people from the 18th and 19th centuries. These were people who were enslaved and fled their enslavers. Historians do a lot of great research. They don't always do a terrific job of disseminating that research to the public, and particularly to kids. And the historians working on Freedom on the Move, there are 5 of us, we are very intent on trying to bridge that gap.
As always, we're going to take a time portal back into the past. And today, the way we're going to get that is through your understanding of how teenagers and why teenagers run away.
I used the database to create a lesson that gave students the opportunity to look into the database, identify people. They first had identified 7 ads of different people, women, men, children. And from that, they had to pick one of the people that they most connected to. What do they look like? What did their world look like? And they took that information and created an art piece to bring the ad alive.
Which ad feels like you? Where do you see yourself or somebody that you know? Because we will then write a narrative based on the one ad that you choose.
My
Sorry.
ad was a mulatto woman escaping the plantation, and she was trying to escape to freedom.
Is there a particular ad that inspired this picture?
Yeah, it's the one about Joe, a 25-year-old man, 5'7", I think.
In the ad they gave us, they didn't give us a lot of information about her. And most of the things were not available. So we just have her name and her eye color.
She's known for like changing her identity, and like she could change, like look like a boy, or look like stay like looking like a female.
Right.
Like she's really good at that, and that's why it's kind of hard to catch her.
Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead, but just so you could hear some of the voices of the students doing their creative response. But I'm going to see if I can show you some of the footage of the field trips.
And we stop, and she shows us that this was where an actual slave market happened on these grounds.
For them to see the slave market space and to be like, it's a hotel. It's a hotel.
And there's one part where students were walking, and Shanna shows us the actual sign that says, that one said exchange, it says change. And you can see that that's exactly where it happened.
The other part about displacement was the conversation for them around the Atlantic slave trade. To see the mighty Mississippi move fast and to realize the idea that this was a mode of transportation. This is, people came from this place, stolen folks came on these waters here, were taken off, and went to work right there.
For them to just be able to walk through the city and see that slavery was not only downtown, but then go to the Whitney and see an actual slave quarter was just amazing to me.
We think of now when we make stuff and you want to sell it at a market, all that money is yours, right? Right? That doesn't belong to enslaved people.
I really felt heartbroken. I already knew that it was bad how Black people were treated back then. I didn't know it was just to the extent.
It was hard truth. They got to see that people, some of their ancestors probably, who decided to self-emancipate were actually hunted using dogs like dogs because they were considered to be property and not people. I think what stood out the most for the kids were seeing actual slave quarters and how it was split up when they went into the house, and they're like, an entire family had to be in this room. I was like, yeah, an entire family.
All of us was in their shoes, pulled from the same thing, like just like them. I don't think they fully understood what life was like until they saw it. They found their names on the walls, their last names, and so they know that they have a connection to the actual city. Who gets to be remembered and who doesn't? Because that's the ultimate question that we end on, is who gets to be remembered, how do they get to be remembered, and what can we all do to better remember people like those who worked here at Whitney Plantation? About my form. Open the door, hands up, hands down, grab short.
Want to welcome to okay. So I'm just gonna stop there for a second. That you saw a little bit of everything. Some of the students, the youngest ones, actually learned how to do spoken word and record their own poems in spoken word, and they learned how to edit it. And so the teacher sort of built that into the history lesson was also learning how to use this equipment or whatever. And so it was really amazing to see not just that the children that small could get invested in the story of the people that they decided to write their poem about, right? They're able to focus on those individual people and individual stories, but then to be able to express their feelings about that story and in a creative way was really impressive. And from what I am not the K-12 teacher, right? So what you're hearing from me is it's sort of filtered through me as the person who was sort of in charge of all the moving parts. And that was the most affecting thing, I think, to see. And I think it's the thing that most helped students take something away from this project, that they were able to use their own creativity to respond to these stories of resistance. The last piece that we of the project, not unlike Kofi's Fire, I see, is we did also let's see if I can share this one more time. We did do a comic book. Initially, we had planned to just have some activity kits that we would send out with the kids as they went on the field trips, but we decided to do something that would be more evergreen. And so we worked with a company called True Fiction to tell the story of Jane and her struggle to self-liberate. And the reason I wanted to point this out to you especially is that what we tried to do with Jane's freedom was to use the actual spaces of places in New Orleans where the students might visit. So you can see, this is the Herman Grima house. They have an urban slavery tour. You can see it here in the comic book. And there are other instances of this throughout the comic book. You can see the markets. This is an actual room in the Herman Grima house where the kitchen is. So the thinking behind this, particularly with True Fiction's creators, is that when you're telling these stories, that it really matters to the students that their community is important enough that it would be in a book like this that your teacher is using to teach you about the city, and particularly about this topic. So they can not only see themselves in the ads, as the one teacher Derek was talking about, asking the teenagers to find other teenagers in the database and respond to them, but they can also see their city. And that, I think, is those two things together. Those two things work together in a way that's more powerful than I would have thought. I went into the project thinking sort of abstractly, like, oh, we want them to see the city differently. You know, we want to create an alternative landscape, et cetera, et cetera. And what I didn't anticipate was like the kind of real personal responses that the students had to what they learned, and then to the spaces that they went to. And this also was just coming out of COVID. So some of these kids were so young, they'd like never really been on a real field trip. So I think that made a difference for them as well. So I will stop there. I hope I haven't gone over too long.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate it. As you're talking, I can just see so many beautiful connections between the New Orleans project and then what Max did with his students. And I think the our bigger theme here is that we can all do this wherever we live. So I've lived a lot of my life in the South. So in Texas, in Alabama, in Georgia, and really living in Alabama when I actually started to see when I grew up in Texas, I didn't have anybody introduce me to this history that was all around me. When I taught in Alabama, I did some of the work to teach my students like how to see their city. I taught in Selma, and there was so much rich history there. But as I've worked with students and teachers around the country, in New York, in Massachusetts, in Illinois, it's so easy to think that this history happened down there and back then. One of my Massachusetts teachers said that. He said, we just always think it happened down there and back then. And the truth is it happened right here. And like our city was built on like because of the transatlantic slave trade.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for giving up a part of your evening to be with us. Like I said before, my name is Max Comando. I'm primarily a ninth grade social studies teacher in New Haven, Connecticut. And so the focus of my lesson that I developed was, and I'm going to share here. All right. Is that big enough for everybody? I can make it a little bigger if we need. Maybe that's a little better. So I developed really using a few sources inspired primarily by the People Not Property resources that were just presented. I sort of thought about what that would look like in New Haven. And so I came up with sort of a 3-lesson arc that really focuses on this guiding question throughout all of them, which is how does the history and space of New Haven, Connecticut reflect the institution of slavery and resistance to it? And so what I really wanted to do was first position students in a way to think about their background of knowledge of slavery in itself, and then sort of center that on the historic Hudson Valley website. So the first lesson is, how is the institution of slavery reflected in the history and space of New Haven? So we in this lesson sort of just by centering the conversation on the fact that this is colonized land, that the Quinnipiac people have lived in and around the New Haven harbor, and then some prior work that students would do is learning about a little brief history of the colonization of it. Because one of the things that Julia had mentioned was this idea of microhistory. And I was really inspired by that to kind of get some of the stories of New Haven. So the lesson would start with students generating their own definition of slavery and then using the historic Hudson Valley website to sort of compare how close their own understanding was with sort of this more academic. And then students would be looking at a piece of New Haven history that I think was really cool, and kudos to the passionate city members of New Haven that really fought to bring this to life, because there's now a corner in New Haven right off the green called Lucretia's Corner. And Lucretia was New Haven's first recorded Black resident right at the founding. She came with the man who would become the governor of the New Haven colony. And so looking at the work that was done to unearth her story, to honor her place in New Haven, I thought was a really cool way to sort of start the lesson. And it begins to open up the story. I really sort of thought these questions were a good way to get students to start thinking about the way we remember history and whose history we remember. Just by thinking about, why do you think Lucretia's story was left out for so long? It wasn't until it was 2023 or 2022, excuse me, where the city officially recognized her role in the founding, and she was honored with her corner. So I think it's a good way to start thinking about historical memory by using that concept of microhistory and telling Lucretia's story. Then we sort of go out to a larger view of colonial Connecticut and using a primary source of census data. Um, in New Haven, we're very lucky to have some resources from the Gilder Lehrman Center for the study of slavery, resistance, and abolition, which is through Yale. And so they have kind of compiled some very teacher-friendly resources to engage students, and one of which is the slave population of colonial Connecticut that through the years. So for me, teaching in high school, a lot of times the narrative is focused heavily on the South, and we often forget about our own backyard. And so this was a really good way um, to shed some light on the people who lived in the New Haven colony, the enslaved people that helped build the city itself. And so that's really the first day, as well as a picture from the New Haven Museum, which focuses on the final sale of slaves. Again, partnered with the concept. So in the North, we have this concept of gradual emancipation, right? It wasn't all slaves are free on this date. It was sort of a rolling date of when you were born, and when you would be um, freed, essentially. So the final sale of slaves occurred on the New Haven Green. So this is the sale of final sale of slaves in all of Connecticut, and was done by somebody who purchased these enslaved individuals immediately to free them. And so this is right on the corner of the Green. It's like a bus stop now. But just the image that they have in the New Haven Museum of this final sale of slaves. So really rooting the first day of looking at the institution of slavery from the very beginning, of our schools, or the city our school is in's history. I thought was a good way to start the conversation. The second day goes to the concept of resistance. And so the guiding question for our second day is, how is resistance to enslavement reflected in the history and space of New Haven? And again, we sort of open with a discussion on the difference between resistance and rebellion. I find a lot of times when discussing this, the concept of resistance is always armed resistance, physical resistance. And to frame it as a way of everyday actions, I find to be a powerful way for students to engage with this concept, in something that they can see resistance in lots of little moves. It doesn't have to be this, massive uprising, which it can be. So Molly talked a little bit about, or will show, the Freedom on the Move site. And so what I really love diving in here, is just the depth that this resource offers. So the first one is Connecticut Self-Emancipated Newspaper Advertisements. These are links. It's a database where it's really user-friendly, that is Freedom on the Move. So using this first approach, where I do a jigsaw. If you're not familiar, students will sort of either become experts in one area. So I would have different groups learning in depth about each of these. One group would have the self-emancipated newspaper advertisements. What can we learn about that as a form of resistance? New Haven's famous for more than just pizza. The Amistad is really a central part of our city's story. And so the Sengbe PA and the other members, or captured people from Sierra Leone, were brought to New Haven, where they were imprisoned and ultimately had their freedom granted through the court system. Currently, I think it's really cool. New Haven is a sister city to Freetown, Sierra Leone, the capital of Sierra Leone. And this article that I have here is the mayor of Freetown was just in New Haven actually to talk about climate justice. And so I think it was this really interesting connection between ways that our two cities are still fighting for issues that are important to the people, and that connection still exists. And then lastly, for this portion of class, I wanted to use the Learning for Justice website, which actually has a primary source of a petition of enslaved people of New Haven that are they're petitioning for their freedom after the revolution is being fought in America. So I just thought that some of these primary sources and these websites really get at the heart of different forms of resistance, and that resistance can look like lots of different ways for people. And then the last part, really bringing in the place-based learning, was a walking tour of the New Haven site. So I feel very lucky. My school is close to downtown New Haven. We're maybe a 10-minute walk from all of these sites. And so this was an opportunity for students to go see the sites that we talked about in particular. So we started today, the third lesson, by trying to ground ourselves in what New Haven looked like and how it's changed. So we sort of compare maps from 1746, 1802, the picture of the green in 1825, where the final sale of enslaved people happens, and then we would walk to these different sites. So my school is close to this historic area of Worcester Square. It was sort of a part of the city where enslaved folks and free people that weren't necessarily welcome in the city center lived. So we would walk through there. We'd go to the Amistad Memorial, which is right in front of our city hall. And without even moving your feet, you can look at the Amistad Memorial and turn around and then see that corner where the final sale of enslaved people happened. And then our final stop is Lucretia's Corner. So the learning goal for this is really a sensory approach, and trying to incorporate just the feeling of the spaces, what you remember about the walk itself, just trying to connect memories to sort of these different aspects, these different places, and just being present in thinking about how our body feels about the sights and sounds of the city that we're in, and kind of rooting it in that historic understanding. And then again, the summative assessment is sort of that guiding question about resistance and the institution of slavery. So this is the short little walk from my school. It's the whole loop itself is about 40 minutes. So it's definitely doable in one of our block schedules. I feel very lucky that I have the opportunity to work with a homebound student who is not physically able to go to a New Haven high school. And we sort of did this lesson progression. And so what I did was I just wanted 3 quick questions for him. Just about, so if you look here, this is the New Haven Green. Not the very tall building that's in the center, but just to the left of it is our city hall. So you can see how
Max,
close
we can't
yes.
see your slides right
Oh,
now.
I'm
I think
so
they might be
sorry.
popping up in another.
I think so. Okay.
There we go.
All right. So I had him just do a few reflection questions. So the first one was just, what was it like learning about slavery in New Haven? And so this is the New Haven Green that you see here. The building just to the left of the very tall one right in the center is City Hall, which is where the Amistad Memorial is. So really the site of the enslaved sale and that memorial is just a really cool juxtaposition that is really sort of tangible for students. So he had just said that it was eye-opening. He didn't know there was so much backstory, in particular talking about Lucretia, I think. And what I really liked is he said it just changed the way he sees the city now. Like when he's walking here, it just changes his understanding. Um, this is a picture of the Amistad Memorial. It sort of tells the story of the Amistad as you walk around it, both through their enslavement to their freedom. And I really love this question when I asked sort of what does resistance mean to you? He said it means fighting against an oppressor to the best of a person's ability. So sometimes it's gathering others to help a cause, joining the army when we talked sort of about black regiments in the Civil War, religion as a form of abolition, nonviolent. I think that was to him something that really stood out was he had the concept of violence as the only form of resistance. And I love here using the courts, running away, or taking over slave ships. Learning about resistance can help shine light on issues that need to be fixed today. So I really think he really was internalizing this idea that it doesn't have to be this grand act, but if it's something that you really want to fight for, it's something that anybody can do. And then lastly, here is the newly installed sign for Lucretia's Corner. And I just sort of asked, like, what was it like going to these places for you? And he had just said that it was something that solidified the memory, right? And how whenever he's downtown, it's just going to change the way he sees the city. So I was really glad that we were able to have that experience together. And hopefully in the fall, when it's a little nicer, I'm going to be working with our school's African American and Latinx history class to sort of implement this on a wider scale as well.
Really cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Now we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. I wanted to give Alice some time to talk about her lesson. Now, Alice is unique because she teaches in Hawaii. And I thought your perspective, Alice, teaching this history there is so unique. So Alice, we'll have about 10 minutes for you to share your lesson, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Jara. And thank you, everyone, and our guests that I can't see, but thank you so much for joining us. It's 2 o'clock here, so I know it's a little later where you guys are coming from. And so I'll share my screen. So the way that I'll do like 2 or 3 minutes of my actual PowerPoint on my lessons. And then I have a PowerPoint just to share a little bit of history of how the Underground Railroad ended up all the way in the Pacific into Hawaii, and how it came back it started right at the unification, which leads us to think a lot about how the whole Underground Railroad, we know Mexico definitely, it was, south going down even to South America, also up north to, excuse me, I have my music, to Canada. But as a Cape Verdean person born in Africa, so we were colonized by Portugal. So the islands was the first place where the slave ships would come. And so it's interesting to see that the whaling industry had a huge, huge impact on how enslaved people are even free from North America, from the mainland, as we say here, was able to make their way all the way here, even to Fiji. It's amazing. So like I mentioned, like maybe 1 minute or two. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to show you this way because I don't know what's going on, but I don't want to have any issues either. All right. So the first thing that I wanted to do is explain that I'm at a school called Aliamanu Middle. It is 80% military. So we have all 6 branches. And I know now we have a 7th branch, which is space, I believe. But anyways, so the students where I'm at, I'm in Honolulu. So Oahu is where Waikiki is. And so in Honolulu, we have these populations and they transit every 3 years. So we're getting students, I teach middle school. So one of the things that we find is difficult teaching history is that where students are coming from, they might have never heard anything about slavery at all. I mean, especially if they're entering 7th grade and 6th grade, they're coming from New York or they're coming from, South Dakota, wherever they're coming from, they might not have had anything except a little bit of Native American history. So sometimes that's a challenge. So looking here is the first lesson is about defining slavery. And so what I decided to do that I feel that works really great with kids is that leaving them on their own for them to be looking at, I like to use graphic organizers. So they go to the historic Hudson Valley and they look at the section that defines slavery. And then they also utilize the National Park Service, and they'll do their own kind of little dictionary thing that they're going to be doing to create, kind of defining slavery. There's a lesson extension which individuals, they can respond to questions that teachers have. I might have 1 or 2 questions, but not much, just enough to get them have a taste and a feel of what we're going to be talking about. So that's just it. That's the first thing that we're going to be doing is vocabulary prep and doing some vocabulary. Now, if I can just see how I can navigate out of here to my project itself.
I think it's on the tab right up next to that, to the tab you're in, the little yellow Underground Railroad, maybe.
I'm sorry, I don't see that. So let me just go back to, let's see if I can go back to, no, can't go back. Hold on. I don't know what's going on, but let me go. Like, oh, you mean my tabs up here? You know why? Because the whole presentation is at the top half, so it's hiding things. So let me see if I could find. If I can just go back. I'll just go back. So, sorry, we're all having difficulties today, it seems like, but it's okay. All right. And so just in case this happens again, I'm just going to talk about the second one. So the second one is, maybe I can, let me see, let's try it, is about resistance. Again, they go to the historic Hudson Valley website, people, not property. We look at a couple of videos, talk about, it's a TED Talk video that talks about slavery in the North and in the South. His name is Anthony Hazards. He has a good little video that you could check out. And so once I have the kids view it, I always have we view it, and then after the kids view it themselves on their own Chromebook. So they always have 2 viewings. And in between there might be a question or 2, or I open it up for questions. Or clarity. What didn't you understand? What was unclear? What are some things that we need to investigate that maybe this presentation or video that you might have? And I usually have them write everything in their active notebooks. So later on, we have a diverse set of questions and curiosity. And so each student write down a takeaway from the TED Talk and they share it in small groups. I don't do that much of like, okay, raise your hand, who would like to? I have students do turn and talk where they're talking in their group, or maybe I'll have one small group go to another group and they would share ideas. And I just walk around the room and see what it is that kind of like I'm hearing that might not be clear. The second activities that students are going to be looking at a list. These are all different resources. So these are all primary resource firsthand. So the rebellion, maybe a revolt, maybe something went to court because there was an issue maybe in a city or a town where someone was accused and a slave person was accused. So these are all stories, and like Whitney, they'll look at the poems and writing. We all know that she was brought to court in a panel of these very kind of scholarly people to kind of defend, like, oh, you didn't write this, did you? So we have some of that. So that's really nice. And so this is the second half that they do, is that they look at that, and what they need to do is that they need to find two. There's 15 historical narratives. They need to choose two. From the two, they're going to write a short little summary of what was it about, what was the detail, what happened, and ask students to complete this handout. So like I said, I always have a graphic organizer. Let me see. So this is the handout. And in my handout, I always include the GLOs in this task that we did. Do you feel that you were a self-directed learner? Did you utilize complex thinking? Were you an effective user of technology? And then provide one method that might help our country understand HHV people. Not so I always include some sort of reflection. Like this one is, what did you get out of HHV, which is the people not property? What new knowledge did you learn? What information would you share from the HHV introduction video? And when they have these, and I do these type of like PDs, I often would go and share those ideas that they're sharing. Like somebody might say like, oh, I love the website, but it was really hard navigating this. Or sometimes I'll do that, but I'll only do it if I know that the partnership that I have with the organization is going to want to be wanting that information. So here it's like, what are your perspective on why words matter? What does it mean to you? And that's part of our vocabulary that we learned. So everything comes in this little package here. I say like a little reflection package that students can do. I try not to do, put it this way, not try to do. I find it difficult for students to summarize things sometimes because they're not very good. Not all my students are good writers. Right now, assessing the students, I have 8th graders that are writing at 3rd, 4th, and 5th, reading and writing at 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade level. So that's a big concern. I know as educators, we're all trying to figure out how we're going to do that. So with that being said, also, there's another lesson, I just didn't put it here, where students are visiting the People Not Property. There's an introduction video with all of the scholars that put together the People Not Property. And students are going to, they have a graphic organizer. Out of the 15 guest speakers, they need to choose 5. And then they need to write what was important that they said, what was their I usually explain that historians usually have some sort of subject or theme, like if someone's talking about resistance, and that's what they're focused on, their dissertation or their study or research. They might be, someone might be something about plantation work or plantation life. So, and these are things that we already discussed. So I just want them to fine tune what it is that that person is talking about in this narrative of people, not property. And so I'm sorry, just these are just I'm doing something for whalers, so I included it here. So here is, see, I just don't know where to go and find that where you can see the whole thing. It should say share, or what is it up here? Like the whole screen. I apologize. I don't know what's going on. Okay. And so when we go here, so a little bit about the kingdom, very short. So this is Kamehameha, right here, Kamehameha. This is his lineage. And first person that we know, I know I'm kind of jumping around, so sorry. I do have to thank this lady here. What happened is that Dolores Gutman, she came here in the 70s, and her and this other woman, Takara, both African Americans, they started kind of piling this information, going to city records and finding out when did African American people come here. And so this is where this starts. You might have a question like, during the plantation era, a lot of the missionaries that came here was from the South. Except you'll find that this woman that I'm going to talk about. So the reason why there was no slavery here and they didn't want it to come here is because there was talk about it, but it was a little confusing because the kings here were going, King Kamehameha II and III, were going to other countries to get people to come and live here. So the first people who came here to work on plantations were the Chinese. The Chinese ended up investing a lot of their time and money, and their mindset was for better education for their children and entrepreneurship. So they would have stores. And then after came the Filipinos. The Filipinos really are the ones that kind of grounded, and there were workers, and of course the Portuguese came, but they became stewards because they were so familiar with the land and the weather, especially coming from Azores. So just to go, so here we go. So Anthony Allen, so the first historical records we have is that Kamehameha in 1796 had a black man that was his that created and built like a brick house in Lanai, which is another island. Completed in 1802, the brick house introduced Western architecture to the island. So I'm trying to find more information. So this is an architect. All the buildings here are grass, bamboo, maybe there's no concrete, there's nothing like that. So he must have got some skills from the mainland. That's what I'm thinking, but there's no other historical content with that. The first recorded, so Anthony Allen was a slave from Schenectady, New York. He ended up going and he was a fugitive from his slave master who owned a boat. He ended up traveling within the city lines and found a captain who would take him in. And the story goes that he worked for that captain for 7 years and he bought his freedom. So he would travel. He's been to Japan. This is the whaling industry that they would go to Japan, and down, to the Pacific, and then all the way up to Nantucket, New Bedford, and they'll circle around. And sometimes they do these voyages for 3 or 4 years. Well, eventually he ended up in Hawaii, and he ended up being King Kamehameha I in 1810, his steward. He rewarded him with land, and the land, one of the schools, Washington School, middle school, which is maybe, I don't know, less than 10 miles from Waikiki, right on the beach. There, the National Park Service, along with Mrs. Gutman, pulled up the history, and there's a marker on that property. And so there's 6 acres of land, and this is the map of where the school is in the 6 acres of land. So he had a barber shop. He had 10 huts that he would rent out as hotels. He had Hawaiian, he married a Hawaiian woman, but he would have Hawaiian women fix foods and drinks for the guests. So people who would come on a ship and a boat and they wanted someplace nice to stay, instead of staying on the boat, they would rent out his little place. He had a farm. He also had horses, and he had that's it. Sorry, there's more, but to get into that, I have to explain. I know I'm limited on time. And so he was a sailor. He has a little history of it. He wrote a letter. In 1822, and he wrote to his former enslaver. And I've been finding that there's a lot of letters that I'm finding from different websites that their former slaves are writing to their enslavers. So the funny thing, it's not that it's funny, it's just like it makes sense, doesn't it though? So right here, I have some of the things that I'll just talk about now. So whole idea of creating teaching opportunities in my curriculum year-round is to align standards, learning goals, and essential questions that ask students to interpret, discuss, and explain past perspectives, and to explain it. And I have this little speech that I give that we are here to learn We're not here to take sides. We're not trying to make any type of claim of anything. We're just here to learn the history, the truth about the history. So, because sometimes kids right away want to get into this debate about was slavery right? Was it wrong? What did they do? So I kind of try to make sure that that's there. So I use the true fiction historical Black comics. So connecting to Molly. So Molly, I just reach out to the creator there, and he's going to be sending me, I'm going to purchase some curriculum. And then there's field trips, writing reflections that I often do. Their letters, they'll write a letter to an author or someone who wrote a letter. They'll write a letter, and it's usually very with a lot of sympathy and compassion. And sometimes they even talk where they congratulate them because they, got their freedom, that it was just, it's very moving. I haven't been able to share any of that, but I can just speak about it that it's very moving when kids do that. The other things that I do to make my lessons more creative is that I'm looking at websites using math for students to understand the business of slavery, economic impact using math, and maybe figuring out an acreage, maybe looking at Caesar when if he's doing so many pounds of flour per hour, how would that look like? How much would that be? And that particular math is on the HHV people, not property. So it's very, so it gave me an idea to expand that more, but really nice. Documentary, The American South. There's a lot of literature there that kids, they love to read stories. So I try to go with what they love. So records and logs. So there's a website that will give you all these different, how can I say, different ships, where they voyaged from, where they ended up. So here's a little picture of Anthony D. Allen. Sorry, I'm going back. Bowling, farming, hotel. He did start his own, he had a little hospital, and that's what it supposedly looked like. A little hospital. Yep. And his hotel's room looked like this. So I did get images. The farming is not his, but it's around the same time. This might be 40 years later, but I tried to make things as authentic as I can. Here's the marker that's at the school. Now, we'll just go on. The next one, so here's the baker. So in 1823 is, I'm sorry, 1823 is Bessie Stockman, but this young man here, Kamehameha I, the king, he had a baker, and he was called William the Baker, but we can't find any other information about him. And of course, that's not him. So, but I just figured I'd put something there. So sorry. And so here's Betsy Stockman. So Betsy Stockman had a religious conversion. She was like a feisty girl that worked for the Princeton's first Presbyterian church president, church reverend. So she was like, she had this revelation, and then she ended up, her enslaver ended up giving her a full like scholarship or learning opportunity where in the religious sect of the Princeton University. Okay.
So Alice,
so
this is so informative, and
and I'm sorry I'm talking so fast,
no,
but
it's okay.
Betsy had a religious conversion which led to Stockton, which was the president of the Princeton. He ended up giving her, I guess, like I said, like granted her the opportunity to sit in these classes with white men in there. It was just amazing. And so she ended up coming to Hawaii. She came to Hawaii as a missionary, and there's a huge story about her voyage on the boat. It was amazing. Very good if you ever want to look it up, because it's all there, Google. And she came and she wrote about, she was so happy when she encountered this man, Anthony Allen, a fugitive from Schenectady, New York, who had made his way to Boston and then across both the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean before coming to Sandwich Island, which is what they used to call Hawaii. from 1810 to 18. Okay, Allen had since become a sandwich island success story, owning several properties, including farms, hotels. So she goes back to the mainland because she's here for 2 years. She ends up, clever lady, very smart. She goes to Lanai. She's a missionary. She goes to Lanai, and which is in Maui. It's so Lanai is a little corner section. She ended up opening up a school. She goes, there's no school. They're not learning. I don't get it. So she ended up teaching them Latin, history, algebra, and trades like weaving and sewing. There's not real actual pictures, but there's people back, artists back in that time, which I can't find, but I know it's out there, that drew her underneath these beautiful trees in the shade, teaching the Hawaiian girls how to sew and weave. So that was amazing. And so she also trained Hawaiian teachers who took over for her after she returned to the US in 1825. And she returned back because her enslaver's wife got sick, and so she's very devoted to the family. That's the other thing that I'm finding, that with these stories, that how devoted enslaved people were, how even though their conditions were bad, when they became free, they were so compassionate that oftentimes remaining and still working under, I mean, different conditions, but still working. So we'll move on. So in 1898, we have Thomas McCant Stewart. So yes, time's up. No worries.
This is so interesting. I want to keep going. We have a couple questions, and I wanted to make sure that we have enough time, and we got 2 minutes left. So
2 minutes.
Maybe we could share your slides. If you want to send a link, maybe we could share it with people, or you could share your information and people could reach out to you for more. It's so interesting, and I wish we had more time. Thank you.
No worries.
I think the couple of questions that we have really tie into the work that all of you have done. And I'll just throw it out there. Maybe Molly, Max or anybody can answer these real quick. So when people want to start, so let's say you live in a city where you don't know how to start to dig into the history, where do you start? And I think you've all modeled this as you've talked about your lessons, but what would you say to someone who's just beginning this journey of teaching their students about the local history of slavery? And I do want to wrap us up in the next couple minutes. So
I would say, having talked to a number of other people who've done research who've done research projects in like their small town or their suburban community, like around the area around HHV, your local library is probably, if you live in a small town, so not assuming everyone lives in a small town, but one place to look is like in a small community, right? Like the local archives might be in your community's library or town hall, or if you have a sort of regional historical society, they might have records, and looking for information about that, and particularly looking at I think sort of starting with like, when did sort of like colonizers come to your town, and when did that type of business come to your town? And that's like, once you start to follow those threads, you'll often find that connection, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
I also like Max's approach that I think was in his lesson plan, which is to sort of ask the students to interrogate what is there, right? What is on the landscape now that indicates that there was this history, and what's not there, what's there, what's not there, and get them to really think about that historical memory piece of it, because I think that gives them, it just sort of underscores for them that they do have a real stake in being the storytellers. And I feel like that really came out with our project, is that giving students the chance to tell the stories that they're finding is really important, which is shameless plug for Freedom on the Move, because you have these little stories already kind of baked in. Even for young children, it's not difficult for them to start there and to start kind of unpacking that story and then to go beyond that. But I do think up front, talking to them about what people do not talk about, what is not in the landscape, what is not marked, what is not commemorated, is very important.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And then the last question, it's kind of a question / comment, was about something you mentioned, Max, about letting students really experience the sites with their senses. What could you just talk some about the importance of some of that, like sensory teaching and using imagination to kind of transport students back to like these historical times?
Yeah, so it was actually through the Teacher Institute that we had over the summer. We had a professor come in who really talked about different learning approaches, or rather pedagogical approaches to teaching this, and really talked about sort of having students just be mindful of their bodies in certain spaces if you're going to be using that land as a way to just crystallize memory. And it's just a way to get students to think about where they are and that context in a new way, right? They're so used to sort of being in the classroom that you almost have to train them to think, if you're going to be out doing that sort of in the field trip, just to think about not necessarily trying to memorize the information that you're trying to take in, but rather how that information is making you feel in a certain moment, just as a way to get them to remember more. And then maybe that memory, that sensory thing sort of will trigger as you're through that space again, just as a way to form that memory.
Absolutely. Wow, thank you all so much. This has been so rich, and yeah, I just thank you all for coming and sharing. If anybody has any further questions, I'll put my information in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me, and I can channel your questions to Molly or Alice, Julia, Max. And we're just so thankful that you all showed up tonight. And just thank you to all of our teachers and historians and experts for sharing your knowledge tonight as well. And these lessons are going to be available on the Historic Hudson Valley site soon. Next Thursday night at the same time, we're talking about teaching colonialism, teaching about Columbus. And that one's going to be focused on we have an elementary teacher that wrote some really great lessons that can also be adapted to middle and high school. We have Professor Dr. Sarah Shear, who does an incredible job of analyzing how states teach and don't teach Columbus and colonialism. So spread the word, and hope to see you all next week. Thank you so much.